What do you do when the family that cut you off 20 years ago suddenly finds your phone number 3 days after a funeral? And you already know exactly what's about to happen in that lawyer's office because your grandmother told you herself 6 months earlier, over tea? My name is Eleanor Marsh. I'm 44 years old. I was born Eleanor Calloway, the second of 3 children in a small house in Denton, Ohio. My father was an insurance adjuster, precise, careful, a man who believed everything in life had a correct answer, and that his job was to know it. My mother was a woman who had wanted a different life, decided wanting was the problem and given it up entirely. My older brother Daniel was the firstborn, which in our family was an identity. My younger sister Christine understood instinctively that the path of least resistance was a form of survival. And I was the one who asked questions, the one who pushed back, the one who, at 11 years old, told my father at the dinner table that his reasoning was circular and watched his face do something I had never seen it do before, and would spend years learning to interpret correctly. It was not anger exactly. It was the specific expression of a man encountering someone he cannot categorize and finding the experience threatening. I became, very early, a problem to be managed. The thing about being labeled the difficult one in a family is that it operates as a self-fulfilling system. Every time I disagreed, I was being difficult. Every time I had a boundary, I was being dramatic. Every time I told the truth about something uncomfortable, I was the one making it uncomfortable, which in the logic of my family was the same as causing it. Grandma Margaret saw it. She was careful about how she showed it because Margaret was a woman who had learned to be strategic long before I understood what strategy was. She would find moments alone with me, at the kitchen table when everyone else was watching television, in the garden when she was deadheading roses and I was the only one who'd volunteered to help. In those moments, she was different, direct. She asked me real questions and waited for real answers. She told me once, when I was 13, that the most dangerous thing in the world was a person who had decided they already knew you. She was pruning something. She didn't look up. She just said it and kept working, as if sharing information rather than changing the way I would understand my entire life. I didn't fully understand it until years later, but I stored it the way you store things from people you trust completely. The break happened when I was 24. The family story is that Eleanor overreacted. That Eleanor was always too sensitive. That Eleanor made a scene and walked away from people who loved her and has been punishing them ever since. That version has been refined and retold until it has the smooth finish of something repeated so many times the original friction has been polished away. Here is the actual story. My father stood up during the toast at my cousin Brenda's wedding in front of 112 people and said he wished his daughter Eleanor would someday find something she was good at. He laughed after he said it. Several people laughed with him. He moved on to the next part of the toast as if he'd said nothing at all. I was 17 feet away, holding a glass of champagne, wearing a blue dress I'd bought with 3 weeks of waitress tips. I set the champagne glass down on the nearest table. I picked up my bag. I walked out of the reception hall. My mother called 4 times that evening. The messages were not apologies. Variations on the same theme. Eleanor was being dramatic. Eleanor was embarrassing herself. Eleanor needed to come back and smooth things over. The 4th message said in her pre-exhausted voice, "Your father was joking. You know how he is. Don't make this a bigger deal than it needs to be." I did not call back. Daniel called once, 3 days later. He said Dad felt bad. I should reach out. This was going to upset Grandma. I said if Dad felt bad, he had my number. Daniel said I was being difficult. I said yes. He hung up. Christine sent a card. She understood why I was upset. She loved me. She hoped I'd come around because it was hard to be in the middle. Being in the middle was Christine's choice, not my emergency. Grandma called the next Sunday. She was the only one who didn't try to explain it away. She said, "I watched what he did." Just that. Then, "What do you need?" Not what should you do. Not how do you fix this. What do you need? I had not been asked that question by a member of my family in so long that I actually couldn't answer right away. I said I needed to not be around them for a while. She said, "Then don't be." A pause. "I'll be here." She was. For 20 years, Margaret Ruth Calloway was the one thread that stayed. She called every Sunday at 6. We talked for 45 minutes to an hour about everything and nothing. What she was reading, the garden, my work, the particular quality of Ohio winters, and why she had never left despite having had approximately 14,000 opportunities. She sent birthday cards with handwritten notes that were not filler. She never asked me to reconcile. She just talked to me like I was a full person who deserved full conversations, which sounds like a low bar, and is in fact the bar my family had never cleared. I built my life in the space they'd left. Moved to New York at 26. Got a job in publishing, entry level, and worked with the single-mindedness of someone who understands that their options have a specific shape and they'd better learn it fast. Promoted at 29, again at 32. Made friends who became family in the way chosen family always feels more deliberate, and therefore more solid than the accidental kind. Bought an apartment in Brooklyn at 38. A one-bedroom with a window, in the kitchen that got the morning light. Stood in it the day I got the keys and thought about the one bedroom, above the laundromat where I'd sat on the floor and made my decision. And I thought, I made the right call. No inheritance, no family sending tuition or down payments, none of the small, steady subsidies that people with functional families don't think to notice. I had made it on my own. I was proud of that in the specific, quiet way of someone who knows exactly what it cost. Grandma visited me in that apartment. She sat in my kitchen with both hands around a mug of tea and looked out at the Brooklyn morning and said, "You did good, Eleanor. Not effusive, not performed." From Margaret, that was everything. She was diagnosed with congestive heart failure the following year. Managed it for 3 years with the particular stubbornness of a woman who has decided she isn't finished yet and finds illness presumptuous. I visited 4 times, sat with her in the garden when she could still get there, and in the kitchen when she couldn't, and in the last year at her bedside. She was still reading. She still had opinions. 6 months before she died, on a Tuesday afternoon in October, I was sitting across from her at her kitchen table. She had her hands around a mug. She looked at me with the clear, deliberate expression she had when she'd been sitting with something for a while. "I need to tell you something about the will," she said. I started to tell her she didn't have to. She said, "I know I don't have to. I want to. I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I want you to know before I go, not after." I folded my hands on the table. I waited. She told me. I said, "They don't know," she confirmed. She wanted to keep it that way until Richard read it. I asked why. She picked up her mug. She looked out the window at the garden, putting on its October colors. "Because I want to see what they do between now and then. I want to see who calls and who doesn't, who comes and who can't be bothered." She looked back at me. "I already know, but I want it on record for you." A pause. "And maybe for them." I looked at my grandmother, 80 years old, hands around a mug, eyes as sharp as they had ever been. I thought about what she'd said over the roses when I was 13. The most dangerous thing in the world is a person who has decided they already know you. She had been watching for a long time. She had been deciding for a long time. She had just been waiting for the right moment to show her hand. "They're going to be very surprised, Eleanor," she said. She smiled, the one that arrived in her eyes before her mouth, the one that meant she found the world more interesting than it had any right to be. She died on a Thursday morning in February. I was on a flight to Ohio within 4 hours. The family arrived with the coordinated efficiency of people who are good at the logistics of grief, even when they are not good at grief itself. 11 family members total, plus me. Though I suspected that in most of their internal arithmetic, I was not being counted in the same column. In the 8 days between the funeral and the reading, the family developed a significant appetite for my company. Daniel texted twice suggesting dinner. Christine called 3 times. Brenda organized a lunch at which 4 separate people told me family was everything. My father called on day 5. His voice was in the register he used when he had decided to be magnanimous, a specific setting deployed at intervals when he believed it was strategically useful. He said he'd been thinking about me, said time put things in perspective, said he hoped we could move past old hurts, then paused in the way that was an invitation to respond with warmth and give him the scene he had scripted. I said, "It's good to hear from you, Dad." He said, "I've always loved you, Eleanor. Whatever you think." The architecture of that sentence, the preemptive denial built in, the whatever you think, meaning whatever you experienced, isn't necessarily what happened, was a masterclass in the language my family had always spoken. I said, "I know," because it was true. People can love you and harm you simultaneously. That had been my family's entire operating system. The reading was on a Wednesday morning. Richard Alcapore's office was on the 2nd floor of a downtown building, dark wood and good carpets. Windows old enough to have a slight waviness that made the street outside look like something in a painting. 12 chairs around a conference table. 1 chair at the far end, slightly separated from the others by a side table with a water pitcher. Mine. Margaret had described the room layout to me in October. She had wanted me to be able to see all of them. Richard came in last, set the leather folder in front of him, and looked around the room with professional stillness. Then he looked at me just briefly, and I saw something at the corners of his eyes. Not quite a smile, something more. Contained. Recognition. The look of a man who knows the end of a story and is watching the beginning of it play out. He noted that Margaret had requested the reading proceed without interruption until the full document was complete. She had been, in his experience, a woman who felt strongly about a great many things and was generally correct. He began reading The House on Birch Street with its garden and its contents, to me. Margaret's personal savings, accumulated carefully over 60 years by a woman who had grown up without money and never forgotten what that felt like. to me. The amount was enough to make my Aunt Patricia put her hand flat on the table. My father's composure cracked. Not completely. A hairline fracture, Richard kept reading. The jewelry to me, with one ring left to Christine because Margaret had noted she had always admired it specifically, and that was the only reason. The car to Daniel. Modest personal bequests to the others, each with a handwritten note to be distributed at the end. Then the final paragraph. The one Margaret had written herself in longhand and insisted be read aloud, word for word. Richard looked up once before reading it. He looked at me. I gave him a small nod. He read, I want it to be known, and I want it on record in this document, that my granddaughter Eleanor was not cut off from this family. Eleanor left. She left because of something that was done to her at her cousin Brenda's wedding in public by my son Robert, which I witnessed and which was not a joke and was not nothing, and which I should have addressed more forcefully in the years that followed. I did not, and that is a failure I have carried. I have tried to make it up to Eleanor in the ways available to me which were limited. She has never once asked me to do more. She has never asked me for anything. In 20 years, she has called every Sunday and come when I needed her. And she has never, not once, asked me what she was getting. I am leaving her what I am leaving her because she is the person in this family who understood that love is not a transaction. I hope the rest of you will think carefully about what that means. I love you all, but understanding is not the same as distribution. And I have always believed that what we leave behind should reflect what we actually know to be true. What I know to be true is Eleanor. I have always known Eleanor. Richard closed the folder. The room had the specific silence of people who have received information that requires complete reorganization of a narrative they have held for a long time. Not angry yet. The silence before the anger. The silence of people running the same numbers over and over and arriving at an answer they don't want. My father was the first to speak. His voice when it came was controlled. He stopped. He looked at Richard. He looked at me. I looked back. Richard said steadily, the document is valid. Margaret was fully competent. This was prepared over 8 months with 3 separate reviews. There are no grounds for contest. I want to be clear about that before anyone considers their options. Christine was crying quietly in a way that was both genuine and not quite separable from performance. Then I watched her notice herself doing it, and her face shifted, and the second version was just real. She looked at me across the table, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Not anger. Reckoning. A woman who had spent 20 years choosing the comfortable thing, sitting in the long consequence of it. Daniel said my name. I said his. He nodded once, slowly, and looked away. My father did not speak again. He sat with his hands on the table in a configuration I had never seen from him before. Not anger, not composure, something between them without a name. A man who had built a story about himself and his family, sitting inside its dismantling in front of 9 other people with nowhere to go. What I felt watching him was not triumph. It was the quiet, particular feeling of a long sentence reaching its period. Christine hugged me at the door. She whispered, I'm sorry, Eleanor. Just that. No conditions. I said, I know. It's okay. She pulled back, eyes wet. Is it? I thought about it. It will be, I said, which was true, and more useful than okay. My father was the last one left besides me and Richard. He sat a long time before standing. When he finally looked at me, he said, I didn't know. I said, I know you didn't. He said, I've thought about Brenda's wedding. I have thought about it for 20 years. He had thought about it and had not found a phone, had let the family story calcify, had let my sister's cards stop and my brother's calls become obligations discharged. He had thought about it. I said, I believe you. Something in his face moved. A loosening of something held in place for a long time by the effort of holding it. He picked up his coat. He left. Richard and I were alone. He closed the folder. He said, she spent 2 weeks on your letter. She wanted every word right. I put my hand over my bag, over the letter inside it. That was her, I said. I drove back to the hotel, sat on the bed, opened the envelope. Margaret's handwriting, the deliberate cursive of a woman who had learned to write at a time when handwriting was considered character. I'm not going to tell you everything it said. Some things belong to no one else. But I'll tell you the last line because she would have wanted me to. Because it was the truest thing she ever said to me, and she had been saying versions of it my whole life and wanted to say it one last time. At the very end, she wrote, You were never the difficult one, Eleanor. You were just the one who wouldn't pretend. I sat with that for a long time. Outside, February, Ohio was doing what it does. Gray and persistent, making no promises. The house on Birch Street is mine. I'm going to keep it. Every time I sit at that kitchen table with my hands around a mug and look out at the garden, I know I'm going to keep it. Not for financial reasons. For the other kind. I planted bulbs last week, found beneath the winter covering, the green beginnings of things that had been there all along, growing in the dark, waiting. I stood in the garden with dirty hands and Ohio cold around me and thought about 30 years of Margaret deadheading roses in that exact spot, dropping sentences like seeds, building something in me I hadn't understood the shape of until the moment I needed it. She built it while she could. She made sure it would hold. That was what she was always doing, in the kitchen. And the garden, and the Sunday calls, and the birthday cards with notes that weren't filler, and the letter she spent 2 weeks getting. Exactly right. She was making sure. She was always making sure. They were very surprised. She was right about that, too. She was right about everything. She always was.